Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is the last webinar in our three-part series on how to start, grow, and ultimately dominate your market and have a dominating law firm website. And today we're going to talk about the domination phase for family law attorneys. Just a few quick housekeeping matters before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available to replay online next week. And we'll also make the slides available, so there's no need to take notes unless you'd like to. We do have a lot of ground to cover today. This webinar is scheduled to run for 2 hours. It may run a bit under or over, just depending upon how quickly we get through today's material. We won't be able to stop to answer questions during the presentation, but if you are having technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar audio or video, let us know via the chat area of the GoToWebinar control panel. We will also have a questions and answer session at the end of the presentation. So if you do have questions along the way, please add them to the questions area or send us a public or private chat message and we'll address it at the end of the webinar. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Victoria Blute and I'm the Community Manager here at LawLytics. My job is to keep attorneys on the cutting edge of web technologies and online legal marketing and to help you learn what works on the web. I come from a journalism background, and if you happen to be a frequent reader of our blog or a frequent attendee of our webinars, you may recognize me. If you joined us for the first 2 webinars in this series, you'll recall that I went into great detail about how search engines work and about various types of content that lawyers should include when starting their website, as well as exploring things like how social media can work with your law firm's website to amplify your firm's signal, extend your reach, and reinforce your reputation. If you attended the first webinar in this series, you are likely already familiar with our other presenter as well, but if you're not, I just want to give you a quick introduction to her before we get started. Rachel Shalat holds a JD and a master's and practiced law before joining LawLytics. She is the Vice President of Content Operations here, and she's in charge of all of our content operations, which produces millions of written words for our members' websites and blogs each year. In the first 2 webinars in this series, Rachel demonstrated the basic building blocks of content to get law firms started in the right direction. And then she built on that information in the Grow series to take you deeper into the strategy and the execution of growing a family law web presence. Before Rachel and I present, I want to also briefly introduce you to our CEO, Attorney Dan JAFFE, and I also want to spend a bit of time on a couple foundational items as well. Before Dan became the full-time CEO of LawLytics, he built 2 successful law firms in Washington State and Arizona, and he then started a highly successful online legal directory that was later acquired by a large internet company. And during Dan's years of practice, he himself will tell you that he made a lot of marketing investments, and he also got badly burned several times. And what this led him to realize was that nobody cared about his practice like he did, and that in order for him to succeed, he needed to understand how the internet functions, how potential clients were using the internet, and he needed to be in control of his marketing. So he did the heavy lifting to figure this out early on, and that's why he co-founded LawLytics, to make it easy for attorneys to be in control of their marketing without wasting their time or their money. And today he loves showing fellow attorneys how this stuff really works. I want to briefly review who we are, what we do, and why it matters. So you have many choices of companies and technologies to design, build, host, and help you market your law firm's website. And at LawLytics, we do all of that, and we also have a lot of competition. So what is LawLytics and how are we different? Our company is obsessed with the pursuit of the most efficient method of marketing for each law firm. And there are 2 major variables of efficiency: time and money. LawLytics was created to empower law firms to have unlimited marketing success without wasting time or money. And we have two different types of competitors. So on the one side, we have full-service marketing companies like FindLaw and Martindale Nolo. And LawLytics is built to give attorneys all of the upsides of using a full-service company without exposing you to the potential risks and downsides. And on the other side are do-it-yourself website software programs like WordPress and Wix that are cheap or free to use. And these programs come with steep opportunity costs, and attorneys often struggle to make them work. And that has them wasting their time and missing opportunities along the way. So while both full-service companies and do-it-yourself platforms are viable options, LawLytics offers a more practical solution for lawyers. Our company works exclusively with lawyers, and our services are adaptable to every stage of a law firm's growth. So our members can start as small as they choose and then grow as big as they decide without taking dangerous risks or committing to things that might not work. And because our software is built exclusively for lawyers, the learning curve is really easy, and it enables our members to add to and edit their websites and then turn their efforts into new business without struggling. So, if you are joining us in this webinar after having seen the Start and Grow series for family law attorneys, then you probably have a good sense of where we might be headed. But for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, I do want to give you the framework for where you are in this webinar just to make sure that you're in the right place. So this three-part series for family law attorneys lays out a clear roadmap for successful legal marketing, because we realize that the path to cost-effective and efficient law firm marketing online is often quite unclear for attorneys. And sometimes that's a problem of not knowing what to do or not knowing what works. Other times attorneys may understand what they need to do, but they're not sure how to do it. And other times it's a matter of getting distracted by the latest trend or getting tripped up by SEO sales talk and other things that can keep you from your goals. But to do this right, we recommend implementing this information that's in this series in chronological order. So here's a quick review of what was discussed in the first two parts of this series. So in the Start series, we explained how to get started with a law firm web presence. And that's whether you are brand new to online legal marketing or if you have a website but it's just not working for your firm. We laid the groundwork for marketing your family law firm with sound and sustainable strategies and how to use that foundation to take your marketing where you want it to go. We explained the basics, and we showed you that to start smart, you need to be able to do just a couple things well. And so long as you avoid the traps and tricks, that foundation will take you as far as you want. And then in the Grow series, we went over a variety of tools and tips that can assist you in your long-term content strategy, as well as how to understand the key performance indicators that help you market your firm effectively without wasting time or money. We also discussed a lot of the vanity metrics that SEO salespeople and legal marketers sometimes use that can confuse attorneys and send them down the wrong path, or that can keep them on the hook without having anything real to show for it. And now we're at the Dominate phase, which is going to show you, as it says here, how to climb to the top and stay there without wasting your time or money, and also without having to watch your back. So if you haven't seen the first two webinars in this series, that's okay. I certainly encourage you to stay and listen to what we have to say today, but I do also recommend that you go back and watch those first two webinars, because as I'm about to explain here, trying to implement these tactics out of order is unlikely to produce the kinds of results that you want. It's about knowing what to do, how to do it, and in what order these things need to be done. So, a question that you may have thought about, or maybe you haven't yet, is this: when should I enter this phase? When am I ready to dominate my market? And the answer to that question is based on several things. First, it's a matter of understanding the fundamentals and applying them. And that's why you'll hear me and Rachel keep stressing that if you haven't seen those first two webinars in this series, go back and watch them. And it's not just the knowledge is power aspect here. It's knowledge in action that matters. Knowing what's going to move the needle is one thing. Actually applying those fundamentals to your law firm's web presence consistently over time is another. So make sure that you have that solid content foundation for your law firm's website and blog, and that you have a plan and a strategy as you're moving forward. The next thing that's worth considering when you're wondering when you'll be ready to enter this particular phase of your law firm's growth is looking at some data that's related to your law firm's web presence. How many visits is your site getting? And this isn't a cut and dry number for every family law firm out there. Your geography is going to play a part in this as well. For example, if you're part of a smaller market, you might be ready to start thinking about dominating your market if you're getting 200 visits a day. However, if you are in a much larger, in a much more competitive market, something like Los Angeles or New York, this number might shoot up to 1,000 visits a day before you're ready to start thinking about this phase. So knowing your total addressable market is important as well. And if you were with us for the second part in this webinar series, you probably heard Dan and I discuss that concept when we were talking about growth risks in terms of attorneys who sometimes are focused on what is ultimately an unsupportable market. They're trying to squeeze more business out of it than the market supports. But the bottom line there was that it's essential to know what your total addressable market is and then optimizing your marketing for that reality. So we have attorney members here at LawLytics who are now in the dominate phase after following our advice from the Start and Grow webinars, who have avoided the traps and tricks that so often get attorneys into trouble, and their websites are now receiving tens of thousands of visits a month and often thousands of visits in a day. Whether you are a LawLytics member right now or you're thinking about becoming one and you want a roadmap for how to get there, reach out to us and we'll put together a comprehensive plan for your firm that can help you achieve those goals. So at LawLytics, there are a couple of things that we firmly believe. The first is that having a law firm website that you own and that you control, when you pair that with an investment in a solid content strategy, that can become an appreciating asset for you and your firm. We also see it that there are two things that you can invest into your online marketing, and in particular, your law firm website and blog. One is money, the other one is time. And as it so often goes in life, there's a chance that you'll have more of one than the other, just depending upon where you are in the growth phase of your firm. So let's consider first the case of a young attorney who is just starting out. This young attorney may not have a lot of money or a lot of clients yet, but what they might have is time. And therefore, writing their own content can be a smart investment of the time that they have available to them. As we've said previously, the internet is really a great equalizer, and marketing has become a meritocracy. So you no longer have to have the biggest budget in the game in order to compete. So if this young attorney happens to have more time available than money, with a solid content plan and a clear roadmap, they can use their time wisely to produce their own substantive content and blog posts that put their firm on the board and help them get noticed by potential clients. Now, as they move along and their business starts to grow, they're going to have more clients and they're going to be making more money. And at this point, they may want to continue writing their own content, but they may choose to delegate a little bit of their content as well, even if they themselves continue adding to their website. Here's the problem. As you grow, particularly as you are taking on more and more clients, writing your own content has an opportunity cost. As you're growing and growing, you are suddenly going to have some serious demands placed on your time. And it's why we mentioned in the last webinar that it's worth thinking about things like intake systems and so on before you get to this point, because you don't want to let yourself get overwhelmed. But one of the things that you're going to have to think about as these demands are being placed on your time is the opportunity cost of writing your own content. The choice that has to be made between what is often mutually exclusive, money or time. To illustrate this point, let's look at how our content creation department here at LawLytics actually evolved. So when LawLytics first started, our early adopters were really excited about writing content. For the first time, they had access to a system that would not only allow them to easily publish optimized content to their own websites and blogs, but they had our system to make sure that they were doing it well. So attorneys who use LawLytics to write their own content and who follow our recipe over time are successful and they achieve market-leading results. And as a byproduct of this success, they become busier in their practices. And what this presents for attorneys is a catch-22, for attorneys who also want to sleep and have a work-life balance. They know that the content that they're writing using LawLytics is fueling their success, but their success is preventing them from continuing to write or demanding other sacrifices. So in order to keep up with the reward cycle of writing content, many of our early adopters here realized that in order to sustain that edge that they got through content writing using LawLytics, they were going to have to delegate that task to somebody else. And our content creation department evolved out of that particular need. So the more clients you've got, the less time you have to keep writing content. And you can't just stop writing content. Having new content added to your site is an important factor that Google takes into consideration for rankings and relevancy. And the freshness of your content is something that Rachel is going to discuss in depth shortly. But to keep the flywheel moving, you have to have new content. And if new demands are being placed on your time and you can't write it because you want to be focused on the practice of law, then your rankings can suffer, which would then harm your revenue, and the whole thing can fall apart. So it's a complicated dance because, of course, you want to keep up that momentum that you've worked so hard for. And this is where that other investment comes into play. Money. So if you are in the domination phase, you have a marketing budget to work with that's likely larger than what a beginning attorney would have. So you may not have the time to write anymore, but you do have the money. And here's where it may be time to delegate your content creation efforts to somebody else. Before I get into how to do this wisely, there's a couple points that I want to make. And one is on the ethics of ghostwriting. So I know there is a camp of purists on the web who argue that attorneys should always, under all circumstances, write their own content for their law firm websites and blogs. And in an ideal world, we agree. But in the real world, where balancing a practice with the business side of law and trying to maintain a quality of life, you can see where I'm going with this. So those who argue against proxy writing of online content will point out that if the attorney doesn't write their own website content, it lacks authenticity, or that the content misleads readers into believing that the content came directly from the attorney. Some will argue that it's unethical. Some assert that all lawyers are natural writers or love writing and should not only provide the content for their websites, but should also enjoy doing so. And each of these arguments contains logical and practical fallacies. We've gone into greater detail about the ethics of ghostwriting in a webinar that's available on demand over at the LawLytics website, and that specifically addresses this topic. But my point is this: if you are comfortable delegating the creation of a brief, proofreading it, and then signing your name onto it and submitting it to the court, then the analogy is exactly the same when a ghostwriter is writing content for you. Now on to delegating successfully. So in order to use a ghostwriter successfully, it comes down to a couple things. You have to be able to delegate wisely. You need to empower people that not only understand, but will also abide by the necessary ethics. And you also need to be able to keep a level of editorial control that makes you feel comfortable saying that as the attorney who's responsible for the content on your website, you know what's been published. So by choosing a professional writer that you can hold accountable, you can maintain a consistent publishing schedule that ensures that your website and blog aren't going to be neglected. We have seen plenty of law firm websites that have these large bursts of content creation, especially on the blog, 10 posts in a month, and then the blog goes completely dormant for months or years. And content marketing isn't optimally effective when you simply put some content on your blog and then quit. It really works best with the consistent publication of posts that answer your clients' questions in detail. So it's easy to get enthusiastic about blogging for short periods of time, but what it's harder to do is sustain that enthusiasm over the long term. And persistence with blogging and other forms of content creation on your law firm's website, like substantive content, to do that on a regular basis, that is what's going to get you ahead. So if you pause your blogging efforts, your competition who isn't pausing, whether that's a well-funded firm who's delegating their content to writers, or like the earlier example, an attorney who's fresh out of law school with all the time in the world to blog, they will get ahead of you if you're not adding content to your law firm's website and blog regularly. So just a couple last things I want to point out before I hand this over to Rachel. If you are a LawLytics member or you've been with us for a few webinars, then you know how easy it is to use LawLytics to add to and edit your website. And what we also make it easy to do is allow you to delegate those tasks to others, such as in the case where you have maybe a partner or associate who's going to blog. But on top of that, we also make it easy for you to have control in the case where you do hire a professional proxy writer. So the LawLytics user access controls that are featured in our control panel make delegating this work to others a total breeze. And that's without relinquishing the kind of control that attorneys need to have over their web presence. So as you can see here, you can add an unlimited number of users, and then for each user, indicate who that person is ghostwriting for. As you can see in this example here, we have a summer associate who's going to ghostwrite for Dan. And as you can see here as well, there's that little blue checkbox that says requires approval before publishing. And what that does is it makes sure that you have control over what goes on your website, even if you have somebody else ghostwriting for you. And there are additional permissions that you can select as well to ensure that the person who is ghostwriting has as little or as much access to things like your sites if you have multiple websites, your blog posts, your case results, your social media, and so on and so forth. If you are curious to learn more about the effective use of ghostwriters, I really recommend checking out a webinar that we did on that subject a little while ago. And the web address to access that is at the bottom of your screen there. So, one last point that I'd like to make to you is this. Your time is valuable, and especially so if you are in the domination phase of your law firm's growth. The quality content that you add to your law firm's website on a regular basis is the key to starting and growing a successful web presence and ultimately dominating your market. But if you can't write for your website on a regular basis, then using a professional proxy writer is the next best choice that you can make. And as I said earlier, the LawLytics content department evolved out of that very specific need. Attorneys who had been writing their own content and as a result of it got so successful that they needed help to keep publishing. And today we're writing millions of words of content for attorney websites and blogs. And Rachel Shalat, who's going to speak to you in just a moment, is the Vice President of Content Operations and oversees that entire effort. But before I turn it over to her, I do want to talk briefly about our content creation services for those who are interested. We have an in-house content creation department that is managed by lawyers. Many of our writers are lawyers. All of them have strong writing and legal backgrounds, and all of the content that gets published on behalf of our customers who choose us to write for them does go through an editorial process where lawyers look at it before it ever gets published. And we have several levels of content creation that we provide. So these are services ranging from startup content, where there's a brand new site that doesn't have any content to get it off the ground, to creating attorney bios, practice areas, and so forth, all the way up to these really extensive build-outs of over 1 million words for attorneys who, want to, over the course of a year or more, build a dominating website for a certain practice area or practices or for certain geographic areas. But between those extremes, we also have a la carte content. So say you're writing your own content and you have something coming up and you don't want to have a lag in your content. We can jump in, pick up where you left off, and sustain it until you can jump back in and start working again. And we also have the ability to do ongoing recurring monthly blogging and content creation for our clients. What I want to say here is that at LawLytics, we really pride ourselves on having more than just a vendor-customer relationship with you. We take a lot of time at the outset to get to know you and to create a partnership that allows you to participate as little or as much as you want in the creation of your law firm's website content. We want to know how you like your content written as far as voice goes. We want to get to know your objectives, get to know your practice area. We look at what you are trying to accomplish, what you have already accomplished, and then we make a plan to get there. So with that, I'm now going to turn the mic over to Rachel, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about building on your content in the dominate phase. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Victoria. As you heard earlier, prior to joining LawLytics, I practiced criminal defense in Pennsylvania, and now I oversee the LawLytics content department. We work with our attorney clients to plan, create, and refine their web content. So when we're working with firms who have a dominating site, we generally see the content apportioned in the following ways. First off, there's a substantial base of evergreen or substantive pages. If you were with us during our Grow series, I discussed achieving a target size for your market area. Over the past few years, we've been conducting market research to see what makes attorney sites that utilize organic content marketing really successful in a variety of metro areas across the United States and a variety of practice areas. And the one constant we always observe is that the dominating sites have the highest page volume in their market area. And by this, substantive pages, those include your practice area pages, your reputational pages, your local pages. All of those will count towards that volume. And the best thing about organic content marketing is that this base is going to be your single most valuable asset, and you're going to get an incredibly high ROI. The bulk of your time and resources will go into the initial content build. And that's by no means a small undertaking. When we do builds where we're creating dominant sites, these can take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. You heard Victoria mention up to 1 million words. But the reason why this investment is so absolutely worth it is because the value from your content build will only grow and grow over time. Once you've achieved a substantial size, you can then shift from kind of that creation or addition phase to what we think of as more of an enhancement and maintenance phase. And what I mean by enhancing your website is that you're going to be adding collateral to the site that will increase the appeal of the visit. We will discuss potential enhancements to your site, including infographics and white papers, in just a few moments. And next, these firms employ a blogging strategy to keep their site fresh and up to date. Finally, they utilize a sophisticated sharing strategy to get that content to the widest possible audience and to establish solid personal connections with that audience. And right now, I'd like to focus a little bit closer on blogging. Blogging can serve a variety of purposes. Blog content can be shared via social media, increasing the range of your potential audience. And blog content also has the potential to be interactive. That is, potential clients and others in the field can read a blog post and comment, opening up new channels of communication with your firm. However, we sometimes see firms who neglect blogging because they think if their blog content doesn't have a certain level of activity on social media, or if a post doesn't receive a certain amount of comments, it really isn't doing anything for them. This line of thinking is problematic because it neglects another critical role that blog content can play for a site, and that is to keep the site fresh. Reaching a desired build of your evergreen pages is important. You're establishing your site as an authority in a particular area, and the size of your site is going to be very instrumental in getting strong search engine rankings. But as we see here in this excerpt from Google's Search Engine Optimization Starter Guide, it is important that your content is not only unique, but that it is fresh. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to make regular drastic changes to your site, and the law really doesn't change enough to allow for that. However, we have seen that even when a site dominates a major market area, if nothing is added to that site for a particular amount of time, it really does start to slip in the rankings. And search engines are going to be favoring newer sites, even those that tend to be a little bit smaller. And this is where blogging can really be the key. Blogging will help keep your site appearing fresh to search engines and will help maintain the strong ranking that you've achieved. We found that adding just a few blog posts per week can really help to prevent any type of decline in rankings. Additionally, blogging can serve as a base for forming connections with your target audience, be it current, former, and/or potential clients. Your blog content will be a rich source of shareable material to use across your social media platforms. But also, many firms in this dominating phase take social media a step forward with direct email newsletters. These are sent to a list generated from current and former clients and/or visitors who took a particular subscription action on your site. Newsletters allow your firm to showcase content that you think would be especially relevant or interesting, and it helps you form a deeper personal connection with your audience. Now I'd like to transition to discussing substantive pages when you're in the dominant phase, and there are two things I'd like to address. The first is enhancing your site volume. When you've reached a really dominating position, your site contains a multitude of pages that directly relate to your practice area, and they directly relate to the services that your firm offers. In our earlier webinar series, you may have heard me caution against attorneys using any of their valuable time or resources to cover topics that don't directly relate to what your firm does. But once we've reached, or we're striving to reach, a really dominating position, I changed my tune on this. Now is the time to start adding these pages. Pages that are basically educational in nature and that they don't directly relate to a service you're going to be providing for a potential client. For example, say your county has a CASA program or another similar program that works with dependent children. And this is something that your firm doesn't work directly with because you aren't involved in these types of cases. So if you're just starting out or you're starting to grow your site, you don't really want to waste any time covering a topic from which you're not going to be obtaining clients or revenue. So topics like this would not be included in an initial content plan. However, once you've comprehensively covered the types of cases you do take, you have the ability, and you absolutely should, start to branch out and cover related topics. These pages themselves are not going to directly lead to cases coming from the topic title, but what they're doing is they're adding to the overall authority of your site in a particular area. If you take a look at really dominating sites in the major metro areas, you're going to find a wide variety of topics, and clearly not those where the firm can only just gain business. Now, the breadth of ancillary topics that you should cover is always going to be consistent with your market size. So it will depend on your geographic location. It's going to depend on what your competitors are doing. We really do see differences in cities where there are more heavily concentrated internet adopters and more earlier adopters. Charlotte, North Carolina is one where it is a smaller town in terms of the major metros, in terms of population, but we see a lot more attorneys that are doing online marketing. So the search results are more competitive than a city that's a little bit bigger. So that's always going to be a factor. And of course, the area in which you practice, major metro versus small rural area, this will always dictate the amount of content necessary. And I also want to mention just briefly updating your substantive pages. The reason why we label these pages evergreen is that the content on them is unlikely to change. However, naturally changes in state or federal legislation, that's going to require you to do an update of your site. So, for example, let's say your state Supreme Court rules on a case that alters the standard for what's considered a substantial change in circumstances when someone is requesting a custody modification. When you have a very large site, it can be incredibly difficult to locate every instance where you reference that particular topic. So one thing we really recommend that firms do is to create some type of resource. A spreadsheet is a really, really easy way to do this, and you're keeping an index of where, in terms of which pages, you have particular statutory information or particular information that could be influenced by case law. So that way, if there is an announced change, you can easily locate the pages you will need to update. So now I'd like to speak about those site enhancements that I mentioned earlier. And there are different types of collateral you may want to add to your site, which will really, really enhance the experience of a user visiting your site. There are ebooks and a variety of ways to go about this, but I'm going to take some time right now and talk about two particular types, white papers and infographics. White papers are generally about 3 to 7 page documents that cover a particular topic in really, really great detail. For example, you might create a white paper that gives a comprehensive overview of what to expect when separating retirement accounts during a divorce. These documents can serve a multitude of purposes. They can be an educational resource for a visitor to your site who wants a really nuanced understanding of a particular topic. But we've also worked with many firms who use white papers kind of in a more traditional sense as a print resource. So some firms will mail packets with relevant white papers to clients who come in for an initial consultation. Others take white papers and leave them for distribution in an area where they might have potential clients. And then as far as density of information goes, infographics are kind of on the other end of the spectrum from white papers. They illustrate concepts in graphical form, with a focus much more on the visual depiction than the text. For example, you might create an infographic demonstrating the steps in the adoption process. Infographics can greatly enhance the experience a visitor has on your website because they capitalize upon the strong preference many users have for visual information. And they capitalize upon kind of that decrease in attention span we've seen as technology becomes more and more ubiquitous. Additionally, infographics are highly shareable and tend to be incredibly popular on social media. There are a variety of tools out there for creating free infographics, but I did want to mention a word of caution with this. The most effective infographics and white papers are going to closely follow the branding guidelines of your firm. If you're with us in some of our previous webinars, you heard Sophia, who's one of our senior graphic designers, talk about how consistency with your color and your logo is very, very important. You want to make sure that those remain consistent across different platforms, be it a billboard, your website, or a print resource. And you also want to make sure that they're paired with colors which are not only complementary in terms of a visual color palette, but also are utilized appropriately to evoke the desired emotional response. And again, if you were with us in some of our earlier webinars, you heard Sophia discuss the psychological element of colors. Different colors have been found to evoke different responses from the viewer. And this is something that should absolutely be taken into account when creating these types of collateral for your site. It's really difficult to use a template system and maintain consistency with your brand guidelines, as well as ensuring the use of proper complementary colors. So it's something we generally advise against. For those attorneys on the LawLytics platform, the same team of graphic and web designers who imported and configured or who created your logo will be responsible for the creation of things such as white papers and infographics, so we can ensure that all the visual elements remain consistent and that they're embedded seamlessly into your website and appropriately configured for desktop and mobile users. When you're just starting out and when you're growing your site, the focus is on content creation, and the goal is getting more visitors to your site. But once you've reached the dominate phase, you are getting those high volumes of visitor numbers. But you're also competing against sites who are also getting these high volumes. So what you need to do is you need to stand out. What you want to give the user is a very memorable, positive, and unique experience on your site. So when you have reached this phase, you're really dominating your market area. Chances are you're going to experience some changes along the way. These might be minor, such as adding a junior associate, or they might be major, such as bringing on a new partner, changing the name of your firm, or planning for a major expansion. When you're faced with a major change, it is critical to keep your web presence in mind and develop a plan of action as early as you can, just as you might plan and execute other necessary steps for a change, such as leasing office space. If your law firm will be experiencing a change in name, are you going to keep the logo the same? Oftentimes, a logo change is necessary, as partner initials are a common element of law firm logos. If you need to change your logo, are you going to be changing other graphic elements in your branding guidelines? Will your colors change, or are they going to remain the same? If you're expanding to a new office location, does this warrant additional web content, maybe a new section on your website covering that area, adding some local pages? Do you need to revise the existing calls to action that you have on the bottom of each page if those mention where you take cases? You need to make sure the new geographic area is properly communicated to potential clients and is in any place where you might have had outdated geographic information. When you're faced with a very sudden change, such as a partner or associate leaving to start a rival firm, how are you going to handle this as far as your website is concerned? One of the chief reasons our engineering team designed LawLytics to give the attorney such a high degree of control is to empower you to be able to quickly make changes to things such as your attorney staff should you be faced with a major change. You can easily unpublish one page or page groups if you need to make unanticipated changes and don't want certain information to be live during that time. It's a good idea to keep these things on your radar and kind of sketch out a tentative plan of action for how you'd tackle potential changes should they arise in the future. And finally, a change, and a very positive one, we commonly see with firms in this phase is expansion. Firms who are dominating a particular market area now have the ability to expand into new regions. Sometimes this might be a new metro area. Sometimes we've been working with firms who are expanding to additional states, a tri-state area, and sometimes we see nationwide expansions. So when you're preparing for an expansion, there are some concerns related to your web presence that you should address. Again, just like when you're facing any other type of change, this is something you should develop a plan of action for as early as you possibly can. A common concern when facing an expansion is often how to add content for a new region. We've seen firms integrate new geographic areas into existing sites very successfully, but we've also seen the launch of multiple sites be an effective tactic as well. And there are a variety of concerns to weigh when you're sort of deciding how to proceed. First off, there might be ethical implications. For example, some states require particular disclaimer language to be located somewhere on each page of a site. Other states require that content must be submitted to the state's bar for review prior to publication. In these circumstances, if having separate sites helps to ensure compliance with the state bar, this might be the best route to take. Starting from a clean slate, you can make sure that everything is in compliance, and you can have a set of guidelines that you establish for any writer who might come onto the project for this particular state so that you're always in compliance. But however, some firms choose to create separate sections for new geographic regions, and those are incorporated into their existing sites. Doing this can add to the overall authority of the site, and it also allows the new sections to benefit from the strong presence of the existing content. In addition, taking on a new practice area presents very similar issues. Incorporating a new practice area on your site can have the benefit of your established presence. However, sometimes Firms who are very successful, they might notice that there's one particular element that they really want to highlight. It might be a particular type of case that they're getting. It might be cases coming from a particular area. It might be that an associate has a certain background that really resonates, and they want to establish a site to really capitalize upon that. That can be an example of a time where multiple sites works really, really well. And finally, many dominant firms engage in what I call informational expansion. And this is where firms do not expand into new jurisdictions, but the information on their website does expand to these new regions. For example, you might have a section on your site that covers the custody rights of grandparents in all 50 states. So even if you're not planning on expanding to these other states, taking these types of cases, this opens up many avenues to make your site visit experience more rich for the user in terms of integrating elements such as clickable map, infographics. But you're also establishing your firm as the ultimate authority on a particular subject. And you're casting a really, really wide net to where you might reach a potential client. So just to wrap up, if you have any more specific questions regarding content for your site, I really encourage you to reach out to us. You can shoot us an email at writing@lawlytics.com. Some of you might already be familiar with her, but Alyssa Rhodes is the director of our content services. And over the past couple years, she has helped many firms plan and create their content. So if you have a brief question, you're interested in some additional resources, or assistance planning for a long-term build, we're more than happy to help. And I'm now going to turn the mic back over to Victoria, who's going to cover a few more important elements before we wrap up for the day.
Thanks, Rachel. So a few last things that I want to mention before we complete this webinar, and one of them is the risks that you face at this stage of your growth. Some of these are going to be familiar to you if you've been with us for the first two parts of this webinar series, and some of the risks that you'll face at this stage may be new. Bad practices. This is one that is a risk to you at any point throughout your law firm's growth, but in this stage it can be particularly dangerous because of all the work that you've put in already and all of the progress that you've made. And bad practices here can include things that you do yourself or things that you may not know are being done on your behalf. Bad links are another one of those things that can cause trouble. Other things like duplicate pages and duplicate content. But if you need a refresher on all of the bad practices that can get you into trouble with Google, I definitely recommend that you go check out Google's Webmaster Guidelines to make sure that you stay on the right side of things. And if you have someone else handling some aspect of your web presence, that you also know what's being done and why, and whether that's in line with what Google expects. Algorithm changes. This next one is related to the first one to some degree, because if you've been engaging in bad practices, and that's particularly ones that go against Google's Webmaster Guidelines, you could be in trouble the next time that Google makes an algorithm change. Keep in mind that at scale, bad practices are amplified. So the more visible you are, plus whatever bad practices you engage in, that can mean the more likely it is for somebody to report your practices to the authorities, and the more likely it is that all of the work that you've done up to this point can come tumbling down. Now, when you have a solid content strategy, and that's one that focuses on providing value and useful information to your potential clients, and when you understand the rules of Google, you're not going to have to sweat the next time Google makes an algorithm change, because you'll know that what you're doing is on the right track. The target on your back. So I recognize that sounds kind of ominous, but the higher you climb and the more success that you have, the more you may find others trying to copy what you're doing. And sometimes that can include downright copying your content. The content that you create may not only attract potential clients, it may also attract your competitors. And that can be really frustrating after all of the work that you've put in to create content that's original and useful for your potential clients, you know, to have somebody come along and copy it for their own website. But if you find that someone is stealing your content, there are some things that you can do. So firstly, there are definitely tools that you can use for detection in the first place. Google Alerts is a good one. Copyscape is another one. But if you do happen to find your work elsewhere on the web, there are some tactics you can employ. The first thing that you may want to try is picking up the phone and calling the attorney who's copying your content. We've talked a lot in this webinar series about things that are done for attorneys by legal marketers and webmasters and copywriters that the attorneys who hire them may not even know about. And this could be a case like that. So it's possible that this attorney hired someone and that person lifted your content for this attorney's site. So calling the attorney directly can sometimes resolve this issue. And it doesn't hurt either to follow up your phone call with an email too, which provides you with a record of your request and what was said. But if that doesn't work, either in the case where you can't reach the person by phone, they refuse to respond to emails, or if they just refuse to remove the content, there's always the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or the DMCA. And a DMCA takedown is when content is removed from a website at the request of the owner of the content or the owner of the copyright of the content. But at the end of the day, keep in mind that your time is valuable and you only have so much of it. So if you spend too much time running around after people who are copying your work, that's going to take away from your ability to produce even more content for your site. And perhaps more importantly, it may keep you from being focused on your practice. So it's a balance. Lastly is sabotage. So sabotage can show up in a variety of different forms. And of the many reasons that we caution attorneys against using pay-per-click marketing or PPC to carry your law firm's marketing and to carry your law firm's business, there's click fraud to think about. So if a competitor knows that you're using PPC, they might just click on your ads because they can, and that costs you money without anything to show for it. And as we've said in previous webinars, PPC comes with some risks in that the people who are clicking on your ads, they might be accidental clicks, they might be potential clients, but they also might be your competitors. And whether or not that person is an actual potential client who may actually convert, once that money is gone, it's gone. Another form of sabotage that could come up, though I say that this would take an extraordinary amount of time and effort on the part of whoever was responsible, is submitting your site to link farms and directories that have been sources of spam. I will say this, though, that once you are really well established, as you would be in the domination phase of growth, and you have these huge content build-outs with millions of words and tons of useful information for your potential clients, and you're generating a lot of revenue from that work, if someone were to do that, it would be established pretty quickly that you were likely not responsible for such a thing. It just would not make sense that you would do something like that after all of the work that you've put in and that you've really built up this website. However, one of the more likely methods of sabotage would be a competitor who hires somebody or hires a company to try and smear your reputation. And that is why we really stress, as we did in the last webinar, to get on top of your reputation management early. Ask for those reviews often. Start building those resources early on. And here at LawLytics, we do offer a Bird Eye Reputation Management add-on for our attorney members, and we also offer it to our non-members. It's just not as deeply discounted as it is with our membership. So if you're curious about that, we also did a webinar recently on the subject of reputation management that is now available to view for free on demand over at our website. Lastly, I want to bring up what could be described as the 1% difference makers. But before I discuss what they are, I want to mention why it's important to implement these difference makers now and not at some earlier point in your foundation and growth strategies. And this is one of those things that can trip up attorneys, the 1% difference makers. This is an area where attorneys want to obsess over implementing these bits right out of the gate. But if you do that, they're not going to have the effect that they will if you do them once the foundation has been established. So let's talk about what those are. First is semantic markup. So if you're not familiar with this term, semantic markup refers to the code that's used to reinforce the meaning of your web pages to search engines, which can help them be found by potential clients when they make relevant searches. So humans have eyes. We can look at something like a web page and pretty quickly make a determination about what the web page means or what it's about. Search engines can't do that, and therefore the markup helps a search engine understand what a page is about and whether it's relevant to somebody's interests when they make a relevant search. With LawLytics, our system automatically adds attorney-specific markup that is strategic and effective and helps your work get found by potential clients. And it doesn't require you to quit your day job to learn how to code or anything like that. Page speed is next. So again, this is one of those issues that attorneys sometimes obsess about. We brought it up in the Grow webinar for this family law series, but I bring it up again because I think it's valuable to understand what role this plays in your law firm's web presence. So let me reiterate just briefly what was discussed in the last webinar, and that's this. If you were to take a completely blank website, nothing on it, just a blank page, that site is likely to score a perfect score on a site speed calculator. Unfortunately, that would be completely useless. There's nothing on it. Now, as you keep adding elements to a site, you're going to see a decrease in that site speed. And if you add a lot of heavy elements, what we generally consider to be unnecessary bells and whistles, then you're really going to see that number drop. So what we explained in that webinar, if you didn't join us for it, it's about striking the balance between a completely empty website, which wouldn't do you any good, it would be useless, and a site that is overloaded with elements that slow it down. Now, once you're at the domination phase of your growth, there's something else to consider here. Where site speed is concerned, so long as your site is reasonably fast, we're talking 70th percentile, 80 in mobile, it doesn't make too much of a difference. But if you are getting 15,000 visits a day, you're going to get some from mobile on a 3G connection, which could mean a slow loading site. And as we know, if a site loads too slowly, a potential client's first line of defense is to leave and go find another site that answers their question. So getting big numbers means that there is something else, there's something additional that you have to balance there. So not just the elements of the site, but the number of visitors that you're receiving. Marketing automation. When you have few visitors at first, your goal should be to get visitors to your site. And as your site grows and your visits grow, you'll want to build up your options. So it won't be enough anymore to have your options be contact my firm or leave. And that's not even enough in the early phases. You really want to give your potential clients lots of text information about their case or matter or problem. But when you start hitting those big numbers, then it's time to think about a variety of ways to present that information. So like Rachel was talking about, ebooks, white papers, other collateral, newsletter subscriptions, and while you have to create those or hire someone to do it for you, sending these items to potential clients are things that can be handled efficiently by marketing automation software. And I've written blogs on a number of popular marketing automation software tools for attorneys that you can find over at the LawLytics blog. But that way, once you have done the work or you've hired someone to do the work of creating that collateral for you, then you can use marketing automation software to send it for you and create that connection between you and your client even when it's outside of office hours and you're already home. Marketing automation can help you do more work and reach clients around the clock. Next up, things to experiment with. So CTAs, when you are at this biggest phase of your growth, then you can start experimenting with calls to action that you feature on your website. So try different action words, try different phrasing, see what draws in more clients. Form fields are another good thing to experiment with. So your potential clients are busy just as you are. They don't want to have to do any more work than what is necessary to reach you. Where you can, see if you can edit down your form fields to whatever is absolutely necessary. And there was a good example of this recently in the news with Expedia. So in part, this is a story about how to root out hidden profits with analytics, but what Expedia discovered was an interesting problem. they were noticing that they had many customers who were clicking their Buy Now button, but then these customers never went on to complete their transaction. So what was happening? Here we have people who, as far as leading indicators of purchase intent go, they said, appeared to be ready to finish that transaction, but they didn't. So when they conducted this research, what Expedia found was something oddly simple. They had an optional field under name, which was company. And what happened was that it confused the customers who filled out the company field with their bank name. So after putting in their bank name, these customers then went on to enter the address of their bank rather than their home address. So when it came time to verify their credit card, it would fail because it wasn't the address of the card holder. When Expedia fixed this problem, they increased their profits by $12 million. This, of course, is an extreme example, but my point here is to minimize any sort of user error or frustration that might happen with your form fields. Don't make your potential clients work any harder than they have to. And Expedia later said that they'd found a number of other issues like this by using their data to their advantage, but also by really paying attention to their customers. Let's see. Think about setting expectations on your form. So if you say that you're going to return calls in 5 minutes, and as a solo practitioner, you're starting out and that works, but as things grow, that's just not true anymore. It's the difference between not being able to meet that expectation and updating the expectation on your form, or having a better intake system with 2 or 3 people available to answer the telephone. Last thing is call tracking. At LawLytics, we can help you integrate things like CallRail, which can help you measure your calls and see where they're coming from so you can see what's driving them and use that information to fine-tune your marketing even more. So this is the last webinar in our Start, Grow, Dominate series for family law attorneys. And again, if you missed the first 2 webinars, feel free to go check them out over on the LawLytics website or any of our other free on-demand webinars or blog posts. All of those resources are available to you for free to help you better understand how the internet works and how your potential clients are using it to find you. If you have questions about your legal marketing or you're ready to take your online marketing to the next level, we are here to help you and we're happy to talk with you. So feel free to contact us through any of the methods mentioned here. You can submit a consultation request from our main website at www.lawlytics.com. You can call us at 800-713-0161 or shoot us an email at info@lawlytics.com. I want to thank Rachel for her presentation today. And with that, we're going to end the recording of this webinar and go to questions if there are any.